And for this one, I'd like to bring on Yaniv to tell you all about what they've been working on for the last couple of years on the Geo Browser. So please give Yaniv a big round of applause.
Hey everyone, it's great to be here. So yeah, I'm Yaniv. I founded the Graph back in 2017, and I've been working on helping to build Web3 ever since. The last 4 years, I've been working on this thing called Geo to really continue that vision of building an open, composable, and verifiable web. So I love this idea of the infinite garden, right? We want to enable infinite games, right, for pioneers to come in and go to the frontier, play long-term games with long-term people, right? And right now, DeFi is doing really great on Ethereum. You can actually see how, stable coins and tokenization and, bringing in this kind of money to more people, has a path to becoming mainstream, to growing to, trillion-dollar markets. So, DeFi is going great. What about Web3, right? Like, where are the applications? Right? As great as DeFi is, if all we have is DeFi, it's just money betting on money, right? And we got to get out of the casino, right? We need to have the real-world applications. I think this about sums it up, right? It's 2017. People really had the vision, and you could tell, we're going to change the world, and we're going to do all of these new things. And I get it, right? It's been hard to actually realize this vision. Right? People have heard it all before. They're like, okay, we've heard that. At this point, the only way out is through, right? We actually have to build this thing, right? We need to build the real-world applications. We need to build Web3. So NFTs were arguably the first application, I would say, on Ethereum that went beyond just DeFi, right? There was a financial aspect, but it wasn't just like numbers on a screen, right? We had these, sick JPEGs. And it's I think, not too late for me to get my doodle. These were great. And the way you built these, right, is you had this metadata. But the metadata was fixed, right? It was, you'd anchor it on chain. Sometimes it would point to these HTTP URLs. But quickly, you started to see the limitation of composability, actually, with these NFTs. So back already early 2021, I started these weekly NFT subgraph working groups with, people from Zora and Foundation and Rarible, all these NFT projects. And we worked to try to standardize the metadata for NFTs, okay? Because people started coming up with all these new use cases. They wanted to do ticketing, wanted to do, creator royalties, all these things. And, there was this question, how do we standardize on the schema? So this gave me the early glimpse, and I've kind of been working, since then on this problem. We still have this in social. So social is kind of taken off. You're seeing a little bit of these applications, right, with Farcaster and Lens and things. But even then, these things are kind of rigid, right? It's like social is an app. Maybe you have posts, and maybe it's composable within that limited, structure. But not everything is a post, right? What about events? What about jobs? What about all the different types of things that we use in all our different applications? So you actually need richer ways of structuring information across these applications. And so it all comes down to primitives, right? What are the building blocks that we use when we build things? So on Ethereum, with DeFi, we had ERC20. And that one little primitive was like a seed that you planted, and it could grow. And because it was composable, you could use it in lending. You could use it with DEXs. Like any smart contract could use ERC20, and you have this composable, DeFi. And we need the same thing for knowledge and information, right? A composable primitive that works across applications. And so we've released something, it's a new standard called GRC20, which is a standard for composable knowledge. And with Web3, we do want that information to work across applications, right? We have all of these Web2 applications we use today, and the data, of course, is stuck inside of these silos, and it would be really great to break out of the silos, right? Imagine if, your posts that you have, weren't trapped inside of X or inside of Instagram, that you could just publish anything you wanted to publish to the world. And people could remix it. They could create, their own lists and curate, and you can mix and match and, have custom applications that just plug into this open composable knowledge. And that's the world we need to build with Web3. And, it looks a little bit like this, right? Dun, 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 dun. That's what this makes me think of. But, it's like the early web. This is what the web was always supposed to be, right? Open, not controlled by corporations. And we need to get back to this. So last year, I published a blog post called Knowledge Graphs Are Web3. And the basic idea is that knowledge graphs themselves are the core primitive that you need to enable this Web3 vision. It's a way of structuring information into entities and relations that are interconnected into a global graph. And this is actually the reason why we don't have composable applications outside of DeFi, even in this kind of Web3 land on Ethereum and things, is because we haven't gotten these primitives quite right. And the answer is, we believe, knowledge graphs. So say you had a question, right? There's a bunch of changes at the EF right now, and let's say I just wanted to know, like, what are notable changes that have taken place at the EF since the leadership shift? Like, where would I go to get an answer to this type of question? And if you had some insights on this, like, where would you go to contribute your insights or your knowledge? Right, so, and this is just like one simple example, but you multiply this by all the questions that people have. Maybe today you go to like a chat GPT or something, but like, where does it get its answers, right? Where does it get its knowledge? So if we had a solution to organizing knowledge and information that's not controlled by corporations, right, that's truly open, and we could get, larger and larger communities to use these sorts of things, that's actually, the big thing that will enable us to start tackling big challenges. And I really believe that's what we're here for. With DeFi, with Web3, like, we need to be able to, like, tackle big societal challenges, right? Things like, actually fixing our public policy, which sometimes you look at, like, what governments are doing, and it's like, there's got to be a better way, right? We've gone really deep on this issue of homelessness in San Francisco. As a way to test out these tools and try to understand, like, man, this is a big problem. And it's a coordination challenge, right? There's no reason why a city as rich as San Francisco would have such a big homelessness problem. And, partly it's an issue of transparency, partly it's an issue of getting all the nonprofits and groups to actually work together to address this thing. Public policy is a big piece of it. But, all of these problems we can solve with the right knowledge and information tools. So what exactly is knowledge? Well, data is like the raw bits, like you might have on a blockchain. Information, you're all familiar with, but it's when you have structured data. So you structure information into like tables. So most applications that you deal with, databases, tables, right, they're basically using information. But information is rigid, and knowledge is not. Like, if you think about your own mind and how you learn things, what you're doing is you're creating connections between different ideas, right? Like, this is related to that, this contradicts that, I don't really believe this, right? So all of that, like, you think of that as labeling and linking information into an interconnected graph. And all knowledge is interconnected, right? It doesn't stay siloed within a single domain, right? And so knowledge forms a global interconnected graph. And so at Geo, we've been working on tools to help people organize and share knowledge. And you could think of it a little bit like a Notion user interface for the application. And imagine if you could start with a Notion, you could share it with people, and you could interconnect all of these kind of notions together Notion or Rome. Some people like Rome because they like to be more free-form in their thought process. But then imagine that we could form communities around this. So something like Reddit. Reddit does a really great job with community formation, and you have your interest groups and things like that, except in Reddit, you just have posts. And posts, whether it's Reddit or X or whatever, it just goes into a black hole, right? Everyone talking past each other, shouting, and then it's gone. But what if we could actually grow those conversations, that it was worth your time to participate because that was going into a graph that was accreting knowledge over time, the global hive mind and understanding. And to then start to build up these like canonical sources, right? And it's, if we try to understand the problem of truth, today we use things like maybe Wikipedia as a source of information. Of course, that's still a pretty tightly controlled platform. And really what we want is open platforms that anyone can contribute to, but that we can form into communities to try to organize, better and better understand the world. And so in Geo, we have spaces, and these spaces are the communities, and you can have a space for every industry, region, academic field. These spaces can interconnect, and they can govern themselves, and you can organize and share knowledge. To publish knowledge to Geo, a user can use a Web3 app, any kind of custom Web3 app, and using the GRC20 standard, you can encode your knowledge and you can publish it on chain. And so the knowledge itself, just like the NFT metadata we were looking at, but instead of it being like fixed schemas and information that you publish, it's any amount of knowledge, right? And it's updates to entities and relations, and you can batch all of that into a single on-chain transaction. You can publish that to a personal space that you control, or maybe an organization controls, or to a public space, where then you can have governance on top of the public knowledge. And governance opens up all kinds of interesting questions, right? If you think about this kind of a system, you're like, okay, well, who decides what is true? Right? Like, what's that review process like? And that's going to look different in every case. Right? Something like, in academia, they have very rigorous peer review processes. And even there, if you talk to professors, they'll tell you that, like, it's terribly broken. Right? So that's peer review in academia. What about the news? There it's going to be a different review process. And, a lot of people feel like news is broken. And, but still, you need this kind of journalistic integrity. So having these kinds of, governance systems, whether it's voting-based or also signaling, upvoting, downvoting, these kinds of things, is a really key piece of how we organize knowledge. And you can, imagine in something like, let's say you take a field like the energy industry, and you're looking at nuclear. Okay, like that's pretty important to get people on the same page there. You start doing things like regulations, and how do you determine like, what the right codes and rules are and processes for like nuclear safety. It's something where you need to get people to consensus because like it's going to impact a lot of people, but you also want to be able to move quickly. And I think that's what part of these tools, if we get the information tools right, we'll be able to do complex things, and we'll be able to move a lot quicker than we can today. So let's take something really simple, like the city of Prague. Right? We're in Prague today. You could represent Prague as an entity. Right? That's what we call it. Every entity has a globally unique ID. So if you were building an application today, you wanted to reference Prague, like what ID would you use for the city of Prague? Right? And that already gets you to the first thing. You're like, okay, like usually each system, each application will have its own IDs for different things. Right? And already there you break composability. So if we could get to a place where every application that wants to reference Prague is using the same ID, then I'll understand what you're saying, right? And all the apps will understand each other, and that's the interoperability. Our entities can have types. So Prague is a place. It's also a city. It can have many types. You can have an event like Pragma Prague with a set of speakers, everything just interconnected together. You can have a talk, growing the infinite garden with knowledge. That's this talk. Hopefully I'm at the right talk. Yeah, I think I am. So, all of these entities and relations interconnect together into a graph, right? And that can help us make sense of information. I mean, sometimes I feel like, I get the constant stream of information, and, it's hard making sense of it all. Like, this UFO situation. I'm still trying to figure out what's going on here. Do any of you know what's going on with the UFOs? I mean, it's totally possible that these things are real, right? But how do you know, right? Like, we need better ways to organize this stuff, because if anyone can, say anything at any time, and you have this just, information stream, it's hard to make sense of it all. And so, better systems for processing, sifting through that information, and sense making so that people can better understand the world, I think is something that's like really important for all of us. So one of the things that we've been doing with Geo, because we can organize any kind of knowledge and information, and soon we'll be able to build all kinds of applications on top of this. And so we've been exploring a few different use cases to go deep with this tech. And one of the things we've been focusing on recently is news. So we have a set of editors that have been organizing news for the crypto space. And with news, what they're doing is every day they organize the top news stories of the day, and they extract out individual claims. And these claims each point to their sources. And they go in sometimes, and if there's something controversial, they can add, supporting arguments and opposing arguments. Is this thing true? And soon we're going to start opening this up so that more people can participate. We can upvote, downvote, and hopefully get to a better system for trying to understand the news in real time. And soon, very soon, we're going to be opening up a set of tools for developers to build custom applications on top of this open, interoperable knowledge graph. Next-gen Web3 consumer apps. For the time being, if people are interested in learning more about how we define these knowledge graphs, you can go to this graph protocol repo, GRC20TS. We have a library there for generating these entities and relationships, types, and properties. There's also a link here to the GRC20 spec, which we are about to finalize. So this is kind of last chance to provide comment before we freeze this spec for good. And we've been working on this app, Geo Genesis, which you can think of as a little bit like a Web3 Notion, right? So you can come in, you can organize knowledge, you can share it with people, and then we've integrated these governance tools. So we've had to invent a lot of new UI affordances and patterns to make all of this possible, an interconnected knowledge graph. And we're going to start opening this up. So you can scan here for early access, and it's invite only for now, but we want to make sure that people that want to help build out this Web3 thing and be at the frontier can get some early access. And yeah, this Web3 revolution thing is actually going to happen, right? We are going to change how we organize. We're going to, build new types of institutions that operate at internet speed, that actually, work in today's high information environment. All of the stuff that the crazy people in 2017 were promising you, it's all going to happen if we start using the right primitives. And so I love Ethereum. I think Ethereum has the right values. I think, people building on Ethereum, they're taking the time to really build the right foundation for civilization, right? This is civilization scale infrastructure. The incentives and the money and the DeFi is going to be a really big part of this. And I think what we'll find is that a little bit of knowledge can go a long way. Thank you very much.